Morning. Morning. I don't know if Ellen got her live access back. We're gonna have to find out. She went to bed last night and didn't have it, and we'll see what happens today. Hopefully she gets it back. I don't know. It's a big bummer. But yeah, that was not fun. It was not cute. It was weird. How's everyone doing this morning? Has everyone got their coffee? I'm obviously making mine as we speak because, girls gotta do what a girl's gotta do. Gotta have coffee in the morning. How are we gonna live without it? We're not. We can't. I totally fell asleep and missed what happened. Addie, we'll tell you in the group chat because I'm afraid that if I say too much about it here that I'll also get the B word. You listened to her podcast last night. It's so great. I love their podcast. They released some new stuff this morning, and yeah. Good morning. What was I gonna say? I don't even know. My hair is looking particularly special. Maybe I should do this so that nobody can see how awful my hair is right now until I have a chance to go deal with it. Morning. What was I gonna say? I don't remember. Whatever. I don't know. Does everyone have their coffee? I'm getting mine, obviously, as we speak. Literally getting it in the moment. Thank you for the likes. You're very sweet. Thank you. All right. Coffee. Hey. You just got a second cup? Nice. Hello, friend. Today is the day. What's the day? What's the day? It's the day? What day is it? Are you doing something today? Oh, it's restock day. Yes, it is restock day. You're right. Yes, it is restock day. I'm pretty close to done with everything for restock. Yeah. First sip, restock. Yes. Boom. Thank you so much, Alaya. Morning. Yeah. I see you. Don't worry. I see you. Boom. Boom. Yes. Okay. So we are gonna go to the living room and read, but I have to pause the live for literally 10 seconds. I promise I will be right back. Entertain yourself for literally 10 seconds. You will be totally fine. Okay, I will be right back. I have to pause the live for literally 10 seconds. I promise I will be right back. Entertain yourself for literally 10 seconds. You will be totally fine. Okay, I will be right back. I have to pause the live for literally 10 seconds. I promise I will be right back. Entertain yourself for literally 10 seconds. You will be totally fine. Okay, I will be right back. Everything is fine. Nothing is broken. Everything is fine. Whoa, that was the worst sound. That was the worst. Oof. Don't like that. That was a terrible sound. Terrible. Oof. Honey, I've already noticed you, sweetheart. You asked me, notice me 10 times, and I said, I notice you. I don't know what else you want me to do. What can I do besides notice you? I've already noticed you, sweetheart. You asked that a ton of times. I see you. 10:30 meetings are not helpful. Thank you for loving my videos. I appreciate it. And I notice you. Don't worry. Okay. Boop-a-doop. Reach in the book. I'm going to take my sip of coffee. Good morning. I'm currently making my way to the beach. What? Jealous? That seems unfair somehow. Why do you get to go to the beach? I want to go to the beach. You're at work. I get that. All right. I can't see very well with that too high up because it's, whatever it is. What was I going to say? I don't remember. We should just read, right? I'm going to the beach on Sunday. Very jealous. I want to go to the beach, but it's a little bit too cold right now for the beach. It's your first time getting noticed? Well, you've been noticed. It's officially happened. It's spring break and it's time to relax. Yes. I agree. Okay. So for anyone who is new, we are reading The Circus Train. We are on chapter 20, and we are... Becca is sending me pictures, but I can't look at them. Morning, it's painfully early. My 16-year-old woke me up at 3 a.m. freaking out. Freaking out about what? At 3 a.m.? That's so much. Why they do that? He forgot he needed wired headphones for school. Okay, well, 3 a.m., you can't really, there's not a whole lot you can do about it at 3 a.m. Why did it have to be 3 a.m.? 6 or 7 a.m. wouldn't have cut it? Ellie, so you have time, nothing pressing. Okay, beautiful. I love Ellie. Did Ellen get... I don't know, Tiffany. I'm not sure. I'll have to find out today. As of last night when we went to bed, the answer was no. I think, though, it might have just been, child, go to bed. Exactly. Like, can't we deal with wired headphones in the morning? Weird. 16-year-olds are weird. Yes, we are reading The Circus Train. The receptionist couldn't say her name. It's a very common name. I haven't seen you since the run. How did it go? It went okay. It was okay. I wouldn't say it was my best. Definitely wasn't my worst. Nobody broke any legs that I saw. I'm always going to consider my worst run the run where I saw someone's bone sticking out of their legs because they tripped over a tree branch on a trail run. So as long as that doesn't happen, I always consider it pretty good. The book is great, Rosie. It's great. Great. It's been really good so far. And we are on chapter 20. We are just about halfway through the book. We've read this much. We have this much to go. That's my little bookmark or whatever that you're saying there. I love Sanrio. Do you? Yeah, Sanrio's great. I am a full adult. Okay, so I don't know what the Willow Project is, but let's just read. I have seen that passed out and needed more medic attention. I did not pass out. I did go to help her get medic attention. Like one of us stayed with her and we went ahead to the next checkpoint to make sure that medics went back to her. Like we didn't want to leave her alone, but also we couldn't just stand there in the middle of the forest either. You know what I mean? So one of us had to go. So myself and someone else ran ahead to the next medic tent and sent people back to her. It was very strange, but that's another story for another day. Okay, so let's read chapter 20 of The Circus Train. Over the next few weeks, Lena awoke each morning expecting the buzzing feeling flowing through her body to have disappeared, but it didn't go away. And she did revel in the elation, thankful for that kind of joy that she'd never experienced. Since her birthday, she and Alexander had spent part of each day together, a love that had been building for years finally blossoming between them. Of course, not everything was perfect. As happy as they were to have reached this new understanding, they didn't want others finding out about their growing love. The thought of bringing up the subject to her father made Lena feel queasy. She'd never had a reason to talk to him about boys in the past and wasn't sure how he'd react. He loved Alexander like a son, but whatever Lena and Alexander had was too new for either of them to want outside opinions just yet. So they took care not to let their feelings show whenever they were around Theo, which, between Alexander's practice sessions and their weekly group outings, was proving to be difficult. To make things easier, they began meeting in empty carriages or their rooms, hiding in a maze.
On their day off in Barcelona, Lena was sitting in her room waiting for Alexander when she heard Clara in the hallway. "Lena?" "I'm here," Lena answered, opening her door and stepping aside so her governess could come in. "Is everything okay?" Is everything okay? Clara looked as though she might burst from happiness. "It's here." Lena waved her letter around. She waved her letter around excitedly to Lena, and Lena's eyes grew wide. The results from her examination for St. Ives. She'd been so preoccupied with her budding romance that the time had slipped away. Holding her breath, Lena opened the envelope and began reading the letter. "We are delighted to inform you they've accepted me." Clara threw her arms around Lena and planted a kiss on her forehead. "I knew you could do it. I just knew it. Oh, this is a massive achievement. I want to shout it from the rooftops, but..." She stopped, noticing Lena's smile was wavering. "Don't worry. We'll talk to him. You should be very proud, Lena." Lena sat quietly rereading the letter. She knew she should be worried about the impending argument with her father, but for a few minutes she wanted to enjoy what had just happened, something that had only ever existed between the pages of the novels she read and in her dreams was now a real possibility. "We are delighted to inform you. We very much hope you will join us." And on and on. She'd done it. She'd taken a risk, and she'd succeeded. The discussion about the book, please stop talking about this other project. I don't know what the Willow is. "Morning, Jody." "So, will you go?" Lena looked at her governess. "I desperately want to, but what if he doesn't let me?" "Lena Papadopoulos," Clara said firmly, "where there's a will, there's a way. I'll speak with him. And in the meantime," she said, pointing at the letter, "I have a feeling a certain young man will want to celebrate with you." "Celebrate what?" Alexander asked. He was hovering in the doorway. "Perfect timing." Clara ushered him into the room. Lena was accepted to St. Ives. "What?" Alexander couldn't restrain himself. He scooped Lena up in a hug. "That's fantastic." "Thank you," Lena said, blushing as he put her back on the ground. Clara turned to Lena. "I'd love to stay, but I'm headed into town. First thing tomorrow, you and I will sit down and sort out a plan." Lena grinned and nodded. Clara hugged her one last time. After she'd gone, Alexander clasped Lena's hands in his. "How do you want to mark the celebration? Ginger beer and chocolate cake? A chocolate cherry pie? Cheesecake?" "No," Lena replied thoughtfully. "I want to do something different." "Like what?" "Let's go out." Alexander frowned. "In the city?" Lena nodded eagerly. "What if someone sees us?" "They won't. I'll tell Papa I'm going with Clara. He won't know any better, and she'll be gone by then." Alexander looked troubled. "I can't lie to your father." "You're not lying to him. I am." Lena wasn't sure where her sudden brazenness had come from, but she didn't care. She worked so hard for this moment, and she wasn't about to let her father's rules about what she could or could not do stop her from enjoying it. After telling her father that she was joining Clara on her day out, Alexander and Lena hailed a taxi into the infamous Parc Güell, where they spent a magical afternoon, kissing against the backdrop of a blue and green tiled benches. Alexander could stand next to her, helping her as they climbed the colorful spiraling staircases, stopping and turning around every few minutes to take in the magnificent views of the city. Everything Lena thought looked new through these blurry eyes of love. Following the park, Alexander treated her to a cold coffee at Casa Almiral. Afterward, they walked the ancient streets, laughing and kissing. When they'd finally arrived back at the circus grounds, the damp scent of sweat and fresh air mingled on their clothes. Everything around them was dark. As they walked softly through the carriages, Lena smiled sleepily. A full day out had drained her, but she didn't want it to end. "I'm thirsty," she announced, dragging Alexander into the food supply carriage. She glanced around, her eyes falling on a crate of champagne. Grabbing one of the bottles, she held it out. Alexander looked around nervously. We can't." "The live is paused? Is it paused for everyone or just Shelley?" "I'm waiting a second to find out." Not paused. Okay. Shelly, go out and back. She can't hear me. I don't know. Try rejoining. Yeah. Are you able to hear me now? You're here now? Okay. I only read like one page, Shelly. Don't worry. You read ahead anyway, so you didn't miss anything because you already read ahead. Sneak. Sneaky sneak. Alexander looked around nervously. We can't. We're celebrating. Open it. Reluctantly, Alexander took the bottle. Just a few sips, all right? He held the bottle away from him and pushed at the cork. It shot out with a satisfying pop, and the sweet smell of alcohol tickled Lena's nose. She'd tasted Restina and Rocky before, but never champagne. She grabbed the bottle from Alexander and took a long swig. The bubbles fizzed down her throat and into her belly, causing her to hiccup. Shh, Alexander hushed her. We can't stay here. I've seen Johannes sneaking in and out, taking sweets when he thinks no one is awake. Ha! Lena sang out, suddenly buzzed with adrenaline and drunk on her newfound independence. I knew it! Alexander took hold of her elbow and guided her down the hallway, the two taking turns sipping at the champagne. By the time he'd steered her into the costume carriage, she was drunk. Lena took her hands off her braces and tipped forward, draping her arms around Alexander's neck. At one point, she was so off balance that he had to steady her as she stumbled forward, lest she tumble right onto the ground. He let out a laugh, the alcohol starting to go to his head, but she put a finger to her lips, her eyes wide. Scooping her up in her arms, he carefully lowered her to the ground. She yawned and gazed up at him, her eyes feeling heavy. Time for bed, he said. No joke, when I was reading, I heard Lena's dialogue in your voice. Well, after all this, it's not surprising, right? In response, Lena reached an arm up and twirled it around his neck. Stay, she insisted. Alexander hesitated and then grabbed a roll of sequined blue material that was sitting next to him and unspooled it over her. He sank down next to her, taking care to keep his body above the makeshift blanket that he'd made. Lena giggled as she lifted her head to kiss him. He tasted like chocolate and champagne. Lena, Alexander said, pushing her away, we have to get back. Lena sat up lazily, leaning back onto one elbow. She caressed Alexander's hair with her free hand. 5 more minutes? Alexander glanced around uneasily, but the entire circus was quiet. Fine, he said. 5 minutes. He wrapped his arms around Lena's waist as she settled back onto the floor, and before he knew it, he was asleep. They're here! I found them! Johannes' triumphant voice pounded in Lena's ears. She squeezed her eyes shut. What was he doing in her carriage? All around her she felt movement, yelling, scuffling. She opened her eyes briefly and saw the blurred lines of concentrated faces above her. A sharp pain stabbed at her head, and she moaned, wishing that everyone would stop talking and leave her in peace. She rolled onto one side and squinted. Alexander lay next to her, and she smiled, the events of last night coming back. But her smile quickly turned to a frown when she noticed the other troop members coming into focus. In a flash, Alexander was up on his feet and she heard more yelling. Why couldn't everyone be quiet? She thought, her eyes fluttering open and shut. And then she saw him. I assure you nothing happened, Alexander was pleading with Theo. Lena squinted through one of her eyes. Her father looked angrier than she'd ever seen him in her life. I wanted to make sure that she was okay. What were you doing here in the first place? Theo's voice was cold, authoritative. A hush fell over the carriage. Anna Maria arrived and began shaking Lena gently. Lena, she said calmly, come on, let's get you up. Lena brushed her off. Her father looked like he might strike Alexander any second. Stay away from her. Do you hear me? His voice was like ice. Sir, if I could just explain, you've done enough. Go. When Lena was finally taken back to her father's carriage, she felt like his questions would never end. Papa, she said, sitting hunched over on his bed, her head aching and her voice hoarse. I'm sorry. You have nothing to be sorry about. This is all that boy's fault, Theo said, frustration in his voice. After everything we've done for him, and Clara pretending to be with you, taking care of you. Angry that her father was attacking two of the people she loved most next to him, Lena's own anger burst out. It was my fault. I wanted to stay out. Alexander tried to get me to go back to my room. The trip into town, the champagne, all of it was my idea. Clara had no idea we were even gone. Theo looked at her, hurt. But why were you running around the city and drinking? Lena bit her lower lip. He was going to find out sooner or later. We were celebrating. Celebrating? I asked Clara if I could write an entrance exam for boarding school. I got the results yesterday and I was accepted, she said, lifting her chin. Despite the circumstances, she was proud of that achievement. What? Theo asked softly. I was accepted, Lena repeated, into St. Ives. How did you write this exam without anyone knowing? Who gave it to you? Clara. Theo's face darkened, and before Lena could stop him, he was gone. A few minutes later, he strode back in, Clara in tow, her face pale and her hands shaking. Tell me exactly what happened. Lena sat helplessly as Clara explained everything. How Lena had brought up the idea of the exam that day in the library right before Theo had walked in on them. How she'd said no at first, but then relented. How she'd helped her prepare in secret for months and then administered the actual exam this past February. Yes, there's a jasmine in this restock. Yes. And Cave of Wonders. I need to catch up on YouTube. Totally, Liz, totally. It's been really good. Yesterday morning, I received the results. She stared at the ground, silence hanging between her and Theo. How could you lie to me? I trusted you, Theo said, disappointment hanging in the lines of his face. Clara was silent for a minute. I regret that Lena and Alexander were in a position that might have endangered both of them last night. I had no idea that she said she was coming with me. Clara raised her face to look at Theo. However, I have no regrets about encouraging her to write the examination. It's wrong of you to keep her from pursuing something that she's clearly brilliant at because of her physical limitations. Thank you, Clara, Theo spat, but only I know what is best for my daughter. Given what has transpired, I have no choice but to terminate your employment immediately. Please pack your things and await further instruction in your room. You're going to speak with no one and leave me a forwarding address where your final pay can be sent. Lena stared at her father, horrified. This couldn't be happening. He couldn't be firing her beloved governess. She looked at Clara, who seemed stunned but quickly collected herself and swallowed. Yes, sir. I apologize for any harm that I've caused. She glanced at Lena sadly, a brave smile on her face. Stay well, Lena, she said, turning to let herself out of the room. Papa, Lena said, her voice trembling as she stumbled for her braces. You can't be serious. You think this is a joke? Theo yelled. Lena had never seen him so angry. You deliberately defied me to write an exam for a school you will never be able to attend. You're out drinking, wandering the streets, lying to me about where you are, and then I find you sleeping next to a boy. How could you? Theo's eyes simmered with pain. Lena thought about the years of history she shared with Alexander, a friendship that bloomed into something more. She thought about the way that her father had tried to best encourage her academic interests, always being so proud of her whenever Clara told him she performed well on yet another test or quiz. It wasn't fair that he was now acting like this. She stared down at her lap, fat tears falling from her eyes, unable to respond. I have nothing against Alexander, Theo said, but God forbid anything happen to you. You're a woman now, and to spend time with a boy that way is simply not safe. We didn't do anything, she protested. But Theo wasn't finished. Then there's the matter of his background. He's a Jew, Lena, a Jew. Suppose someone found you outside together. Suppose his cover was blown. You could have been killed. Theo's voice rose, but all Lena could do was sob. You are to stay away from him. Do you understand? Papa, Lena pleaded, but she couldn't bear the thought of not seeing or talking to Alexander. We'll go back to being friends. I mean it. You could have been seriously injured, but I wasn't. I'm fine. My legs are fine. My lungs are fine. Lena screamed as she pushed herself up and thumped on the ground hard with one of her braces. Just once I want to be like everyone else. I wanted to be normal. Theo sighed. You truly are your mother's daughter, aren't you? What does that mean? Lena was confused. Theo shook his head. There's no need to be dramatic. I'm doing all of this for your benefit. Lena laughed bitterly. What? Taking away everyone I love? You never let me do anything. You said that I couldn't walk, and look what I can do now. You said that I couldn't go to boarding school, but look what I did. I'm sick of you telling me how I am meant to live my life. You're grounded. Do you hear me? You are not to leave your room for any reason other than meals or physical therapy until we reach London. Lena balled her hands into fists and shook her head. No, you can't do this. It seems you've forgotten that I am your father, Theo bellowed, and I will discipline you however I see fit. I hate you, Lena screamed, walking out of the carriage as quickly as she could. She didn't stop until she reached the Mirage maze, where she curled up in a ball and cried. In the quiet of his room, Theo slumped into his armchair, wearily with exhaustion. After finding Lena's bed empty that morning, time had stopped, his mind racing through all of the horrible things that could have happened to her. The 32 minutes that had elapsed between discovering she was missing and finding her sleeping like a baby were the longest of his life. He wondered what to do next. He deeply regretted having to fire Clara, but it was for the best. They wouldn't be around in a few weeks' time, and he'd see to it that Horace had paid her enough until she was able to find another job. So as a reminder, at the end of the previous chapter, Theo said he needed to get them out of Europe. It's true. He did. Theo sighed. Everything had become such a mess. He wanted to run to Lena and take her in his arms and tell her that all she had to do was wait a few more weeks. He had no intention of keeping her apart from Alexander forever, but he couldn't risk anyone finding out about his plan. Just a few more weeks, and they'd be free. In time, Lena would thank him for what he'd done. That's interesting. So he's still planning on getting them out together. That's interesting. Tiffany, it's up on the video app. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. These are extremely complex characters, y'all. I mean, like, in the best way. Like, they're... Yeah, so he's just trying to keep them out of trouble until then, which makes sense. Like, I mean, I get it. A lot of us would probably do the same thing. Scary times. Yeah, exactly. It is a very... There's videos of Jasmine already. Jasmine is a clear glue flame. And that's part of why he fired Claire, because he can't... Yeah. It does make a lot of sense. But he's taking Alexander with... Exactly. Because his plan is to take Alexander and Lena away to America, this is actually kind of the perfect excuse for him to set the plan in motion. And he's yelling at her that it's a boarding school she can never go to because they have to leave Europe. Like, he's not saying you're dumb and I won't let you go to this. That's not what he's saying. It's unfair of him to keep that secret. Yeah, but can you imagine being in this position? Come on, Tressa, seriously. Like, it's the middle of World War II. You're going to tell a 13-year-old that you're sneaking them out of the country? I don't know if I would do that. I don't think I would trust a 13-year-old with that kind of information. That's so heavy as a parent. I get that he should be honest with her, but that's... If even one thing slips up, they could all be dead, literally. You know what I mean? Like, this is life or death. This isn't like today. It does depend on the 13-year-old, but what if somebody overhears something? What if, I mean, the tiniest little thing could have caused them all. It's not like today. It's not like saying to your 13-year-old today, we're moving to another state and you're going to go to a new school. It's literally life or death. Not like funny, like, ha, like, I mean, this is a pretty serious situation. If he really believes that they could be caught out and about, it was very hard to get out. And also, Alexander's passport isn't real, remember? Because they had to get him a non-Jewish passport, you know? And the SS are loading onto the train all the time to check all of them. So if anyone literally even if any what if one of the other circus members overheard them and gave them up, to like get a payout or something? Those kinds of things happen. We want to trust all the other circus members, but what if they're not all trustworthy? So there's a lot of things at play, not just him not trusting Lena. Yeah. I don't think it's even about his relationship with Lena. I think he's just terrified. And honestly, I don't blame him. I don't know what I would do in this situation. Be mortified all the time. I mean, it's just, it's one of those weird things where we can't, I get being upset with him without the knowledge, but like, so rough. It's so rough. What a wild time. What a great book, though. All right. Chapter 21. Honey, this isn't a slime live, sweetheart. If you want slime stuff, come back tonight. There'll be slime tonight. This is not a slime live. As you can see from the heading, it's book club time. We'll do slime stuff tonight. Restock is tonight at 6 p.m. Pacific time. All right. Chapter 21. Yeah, I'm over it too, Shelley. As the circus pulled away from Barcelona, Lena tried her best to adjust to a new, even with people with real passwords who were wrongly labeled. Exactly. Yeah. So it's scary. Scary times, I don't blame him for being scared. Especially since he's trying to get his basically adoptive son, who is Jewish, out of Europe. Like, freaking yikes, right? I mean, you can tell he loves Alexander like a son, and he wants to protect him too. It will be at 9 o'clock New York time, Alex. 9 o'clock New York time. As the circus pulled away from Barcelona, Lena tried her best to adjust to a new normal. So accustomed to spending her days and nights with Clara and Alexander, she now spent the bulk of her time holed up in her room or the infirmary, grateful that she at least had her books and the company of Dr. Wilson. She'd heeded her father's orders and stayed away from Alexander, but it wasn't like it had been difficult. He'd taken Theo's warning to heart and immersed himself in practicing. Once inseparable, their paths now barely crossed. On an early June morning in Zaragoza, Dr. Wilson arrived at one of Lena's daily exercise sessions with more vigor than usual. "I've been doing additional research," he said, waving around a file folder with her name scrawled on black ink on the tab, "and I believe you'll be able to walk unaided. What I think has happened is that all of the exercises you've done have created new connections. Your brain has formed a new neural pathway, paths that never existed because you'd never had to use those muscles. In short, it means that you're capable of much more than we'd ever thought possible." It's okay if they ask legitimate questions, Shelley. If someone wants to ask a legit question about restock, I'm fine with that because it is today. But like, as long as they don't spam it, you know what I mean? As long as you don't spam your questions, I'm fine with just like one-off restock questions because it is restock day and that's only fair. They may not see me again before restock. Lena hesitated. A few months ago, she would have jumped at the chance to walk with no help, but the heartache clawing at her insides made it tough for her to focus on little else than she'd all lost. Yeah, but asking over. No, I know. Spamming is crazy. Don't spam anything. Like, there's no reason for that. "Let's focus on moving to a cane first," Dr. Wilson continued. "Once you've mastered that, we can aim for you to be free without any aids." He glanced at Lena. "My dear, I thought that you'd be a bit more excited about this." Lena picked up the strap of her leg brace. "Everything is just such a mess." Dr. Wilson sat down next to her. "I know you may find it hard to believe, but you and your father were overdue for an argument. Up till now, you've never really argued. That's not the case for most families. Things won't ever be the same." Dr. Wilson shook his head. "No, they won't. They'll be better. All relationships evolve, and you're growing up. That old adage, time heals all wounds, is true. In the interim," he gestured at her braces, "why not focus on something that you can control?" "Hi, Victoria. There's nowhere to buy the slimes until tonight at 6 p.m. Pacific time. You will go to to my website at 6 p.m. tonight. Yeah, 6 p.m. tonight, but not before then. There won't be anything before then." Lena eyed the cane warily. "How much time will it take? Until you're free of the braces? With a positive attitude and consistent effort, I would say as little as 2 or 3 months. Lena rubbed the dampness from her eyes. She thought about what her father had told her in the maze. Epimeno, Lena, you must endure. She looked up at the physician. We'll start tomorrow? And so she began working towards yet another milestone goal. Using the cane, she took one step and then two. When she slipped, which happened often at the beginning, she had reached out for a nearby wall to steady herself. But her steely resolve and lack of any other distractions meant she saw improvement quickly. In the evenings, while the company performed and mingled at parties, Lena stayed in her room. Although she missed Clara greatly, she had kept her promise to stay in touch. She was living at her parents' home in Fulham until she got a new job as the head of English at a boarding school in Dorset. Lena would end most days by rereading her favorite parts of the letters that Clara had sent, relishing in the miraculous love story that was unfolding hundreds of miles away. June 15th, 1942. Dear Lena, thanks for your letter. It was so lovely to have it waiting for me when I arrived home. I thoroughly enjoyed hearing about Chadwick setting off a bucket of fireworks accidentally. Settling back into life in London continues. It's been wonderful to see everyone, but the city isn't safe. The risk of air raids remains high, and the buildings are quite literally crumbling before my eyes. Although money is tight, I allow myself to have tea at a local cafe once per week. It's a beautiful little box of a place with a bright red awning and the most scrumptious baked goods despite the rationings. The owner is friendly, but not overly so, which affords me a pleasant interaction and the space to enjoy a little peace and quiet. The tea is strong and served in a small red teapot with a matching mug. Since discovering this place, I've been coming once a week, jotting down my thoughts in a little red notebook. I chose the red cover to match the awning. I've included a packet of custard creams, and I will do my best to send some of the quality streets in the next package. Miss you, Clara. June 21st, 1942. Dear Lena, I couldn't wait to write you again. How are you? Did you finish reading The Count of Monte Cristo? It was always one of my favorites. Forgive my selfishness for the remainder of this letter, but I've been bursting to tell you my news. I was having my weekly tea 2 days ago when who should walk in but a well-dressed RAF officer. He was on leave for all of 36 hours to visit his sister who'd just given birth and had gotten lost while looking for the local pub. It was a pure fluke that he wandered into the cafe. We got to speaking and he asked if I'd return the next morning. He said he normally, if he was courting, he'd have rung me on the telephone, but given the circumstances, he had to make an exception. I was frightfully worried as I walked back the next day. I'm so used to being disappointed where matters of the heart are concerned. I'd never before had such butterflies in my stomach, but when I walked in, there he was, sitting at my favorite table, the one I've only ever sat at alone, with 2 slices of almond cake, 2 mugs, and a freshly brewed pot of Twinings. His name is Fitz. He's got brown hair and brown eyes, and the kindest smile. I know I can't get my hopes up, but there is something about him. Lena beamed as she stuck this letter away, rifling through the stacks for the one that held the inevitable. July 20th, 1942. Dear Lena, I apologize for not writing sooner. There was no excuse other than I fear I have fallen madly, hopelessly in love. I've caught the disease that drives men and women mad. Since my last note to you, Fitz and I have been corresponding daily. He doesn't know when he'll be back, and I obviously can't visit him, but it doesn't matter. We've something special, something permanent. It's almost as though all of those dreadful dates were worth it. We've already discussed marriage, obviously not right away, but likely within the next year. You may think that this is an irrational decision, especially for me, but this war has put everything so drastically in perspective. One never knows how much time one has left. My dear girl, I hope this serves as some kind of inspiration. I couldn't have known this would happen when I was let go from the circus, but that horrible event not happened, I would never have met Fitz. I know everything feels a bit hopeless right now, but don't lose faith. Your greatest achievements often grow out of the worst circumstances. Enjoy the quality streets. All my love, Clara. Aww. Aww. so cute. So sweet. I don't have my watch on. Does anyone know what time it is? The next chapter's not short. We may need to wait till tomorrow for that one, because the letters were their own like little thing in between. I just woke up without a migraine. Yay! It's 7:30. Oh, we do have time. It's still early. Ah, brilliant. I didn't know it was so early. Great. Chapter 22. Here we go. Let's do this. The circus rolled into Rouen in the mid-August heat, the richness of the blue and gold carriages looking out of place in a sleepy provincial French town. In his study, Horace noticed a tear in one of the sumptuous leather fabrics of his chair, and resolved to purchase a new one with his upcoming windfall. He'd agreed to loan Alexander... He'd agreed to loan Alexander to the SS officer who'd come to see him earlier that year. He wanted to see if there was a way to use the boys' skills of deception in their own war efforts. Knowing that Alexander would never willingly fight for the Axis powers, Horace and the officer decided to make it look like he was captured. The facade of Alexander's sail disguised as a capture was ingenious. Though he couldn't imagine what Theo and Lena would say, though he could imagine what Theo and Lena would say once they found the boy was missing, no one was stupid enough to go after the SS. Besides, he thought, Theo wanted this for the girl. The rumor mill circulated fast in such small confines. It had taken less than an hour for Horace to find out what had happened between Alexander and Lena that day in Barcelona. Theo wanted them to be apart. It was, he told himself, for the best. Sir, Chadwick was stooped over a drawer filled with files on each troop member. It's not here. Horace frowned. It must be. Perhaps your lack of organization is to blame. Horace pushed his assistant out of the way and thumbed through the files for Alexander's information, but his search revealed nothing. Chadwick cleared his throat. There's something else. Theo and Lena's files are also missing. Horace's eyes narrowed, and he cuffed Chadwick on the side of his head. How many times have I told you to keep things in order? Look through them again. But there are over 100 performers. Chadwick noticed Horace's expression and just sighed. He knelt down, began laying the files side by side on the rug. I'll be in my quarters. Horace swept his jacket over Chadwick's head as he left. The tentative knock that came just before midnight told Horace all he needed to know. Alexander, Horace thought, as Chadwick opened the door and stood before him, his hands trembling, was not the only one who could read people. They're not there, the assistant reported, cringing as if expecting another hit. Horace stubbed out the end of his cigar. Tomorrow, when they're rehearsing, search their carriages. Chadwick nodded and left. Horace stared at the blue velvet edging on his bedroom door and pondered the situation. He hoped that it was simply an error, an honest mistake, but something told him he'd been made a fool, and that angered him more than anything. The next evening, Chadwick returned with a far different demeanor, rapping loudly on the oak paneling. Horace ushered him in, offering him a seat on the blue ottoman, and Chadwick was excited to sit. These, Chadwick said, holding up 3 separate files, are the original documents taken from your office. He placed them on the marble gray coffee table, and these, he pointed to another set of documents, are the papers requesting asylum to America. Horace felt the color drain from his face. Instantly absolved of any guilt that he had about Alexander, Horace began to think. He imagined how terrible it might have been if Theo had gotten away with this. He was furious that the master illusionist had almost pulled it off. Tell our SS contact that we've got the boys' papers. Wait. Chadwick held up a letter. It was fraying at the edges, and the ink was barely visible, but the words were still legible. Look, he said, handing it to Horace, who read it over once and then twice. A smile crept across his face. And you're positive that this belongs to him? Chadwick nodded gleefully. Has his name and address. Horace shook his head. All this time. There's one last thing. Chadwick held out another stack of documents. Horace snatched them out of his hand, his eyes growing wide as he read them. Good morning, Rochelle. What? I could never have expected this. Do you think she knows? Of course not, Chadwick said, clapping his hands together. I'll notify the SS. Horace held up his hands. Not yet. A wicked look flashed in his eyes. Do you know what would make Theo even sadder than losing the boy? Chadwick shook his head. Horace smiled as he tucked the contracts and letters into his breast pocket. Losing his daughter. When Horace singled Lena out the next morning at breakfast, she was not in the mood. She'd grown wearily of avoiding Alexander, and tiptoeing around her father, and the appearance of Horace only added to the frustration. What do you want? She asked icily. Horace adopted a wounded expression. Is that any way to speak to your Uncle Horace? You're not my uncle. Horace removed the sheets of paper from his pocket and fanned them out slowly. Have you seen your father? No. Well, it just seems he lost these, and I wanted to return them to him. He slid the sheets her way. I know these past few weeks have been difficult for both of you, but he is your father, and I wouldn't want these falling into the wrong hands. Lena smiled sarcastically, making a big show of taking the yellowed pages from him, but as she folded them over, she recognized her father's name on one of the sheets. Lena smiled sarcastically. Oh, sorry, I said that already. May 14th, 1929. It was dated nearly 2 weeks before her birth. My dearest Theo, it began. As Lena read the letter, her mouth went dry. It was from a woman named Isabella. From what she had written, it seemed like she was in love with her father, but it didn't make any sense. Theo was married to her mother and about to become a father for the first time. I do hope Gina won't be too sad about losing you. By the time Lena reached the bottom, her eyes were glistening. Quickly, she scanned the contents of the remaining sheet of paper, 5 in all. Her eyes widening, she looked up and saw that Horace was no longer in the dining carriage. Moving as fast as she could, she rushed out into the hall and almost bumped into him. Where did you get these? Why? Are they important? Lena glared at Horace, her thoughts spinning, trying to account for too many things at once. Her mind flashed back to that day in Aristoteles Square. She thought of Adelpha's words and how dismissive her father had been of the elderly woman. And then she thought of Alexander and how quickly and easily he'd befriended her. How despite all her shortcomings, he'd never once chosen to spend time with any of the other children. My dear, you're looking slightly pale. Should I call Dr. Wilson? Stop it. I don't know how, but you did this. These contracts are fake. And as for this, I don't believe a word of it, she said, waving the letter around in the air. Horace chortled. I can assure you I've never seen any of these documents in my life. You forged them. Horace raised his eyebrows. Why would I forge anything? How would it help? Lena considered this. She hated to admit it, but he was right. Horace didn't do anything except for personal gain, and there was something about the way that he was looking at her that made her feel unsettled. I don't believe you. Horace cleared his throat. Perhaps you'll believe the source. As if on cue, Theo entered the hallway. Horace, Chadwick said... But Lena jumped in, thrusting the letter in front of her father before he could finish. What on earth? Theo took the piece of paper. His reaction was immediate. Lena sensed that he knew exactly what it was. Lena watched her father read the letter over and over again, and then she shoved one of the contracts his way. Well, are they yours? She demanded. Theo's face was pale. Where did you get these? Are they yours? That's all I want to know. Lena was surprised by the strength of her own voice and the heartbreak and how quickly things could change, how fast trust could be shattered. Theo nodded reluctantly. Lena shook her head, tears pushing at the corner of her eyes. How could you? Her voice cracked as she turned and took off down the hallway. It's not what you think, Theo started after her. No, she turned around, yelling. Theo stopped, sadness stabbing at his heart as his daughter faced him tearfully. Leave me alone, Lena, he continued, but she shook her head and kept walking. Children. Horace sneered. Narrowing his eyes, Theo walked up to him and jabbed a finger in his chest. We need to talk. Blinded by the tears in her eyes, Lena stumbled into Alexander's room and banged on the door with the bottom of her brace. When no one answered, she jimmied the handle, relieved when she heard it click open. She pushed it open to find it empty. Lena hesitated. She didn't know where Alexander was, but rather than wander all over the train looking for him, she decided to wait. She had to know at least what part of what she'd seen wasn't true. It couldn't be. Alexander loved her. She could feel it in the tension between them whenever they passed each other in the dining hall. She could see it in the gaze that he gave her whenever their eyes met across the room. He loved her. Lena looked around and glanced at the clock on his bedside table. Anxiety coursing through her body, she began pacing up and down the small space, losing herself in the thoughts as the minutes ticked by. Ow! Lena tumbled forward and banged into the closet door. She glanced behind her, noticing a slight warp in one of the floorboards. She rubbed her knee as she took a closer look at it. It had a small nick in one side. Using her fingernail, she pried it up, surprised at how easily it came out. Inside the hollowed-out cavity was a treasure trove full of small objects. Puzzled, she reached in and pulled out the closest item, an old music box fashioned out of pale blue ceramic with delicate filigree work. Lena looked farther into the hole and then took out a tiny scroll and then a set of silver spoons. Lena? Alexander's voice was thin. She turned around, still clutching the spoons. Alexander went white when he saw them. He rushed forward and grabbed them out of her hands. Haven't you heard of knocking? I did, and you weren't here. I didn't think you'd mind if you started going through my things. I wasn't. I tripped over the floorboard. I thought your father told you to stay away from me, Alexander said gruffly, picking up the objects she'd removed from his hiding spot and tossing them onto his bed. I came here to tell you something. He lied, Lena said, anguish creeping into her voice. My father lied to me. He had an affair. Alexander's eyes widened, and for a brief moment he forgot about what she just found in his room. He thought back to the day that they'd met Adelpha in Thessaloniki. Alexander had known that even though something was off, he'd never thought the truth would be so devastating. Are you sure? Lena nodded. Horace found a letter my father's lover wrote to him. It was dated 2 weeks before I was born. I guess he never returned to her, but still, I can't believe that he would do that to my mother, or that he might have left me too. She looked crushed that Alexander couldn't help himself. He put his arm around her and patted her back soothingly. After a moment, he felt her body stiffen. He found something else, she said, smoothing out the papers in her hands before handing them to Alexander. He felt his face flush and his hands began trembling. There, staring back at him, were the contracts Theo had made him sign. I thought they must be something that Horace made up, Lena continued, her voice hopeful. For a brief moment, Alexander thought about keeping up the charade. He'd spent so long lying to her about who he really was. What did it matter if he continued? But he looked at Lena's wide eyes, brimming with innocence. Something in his stomach told him he couldn't do it anymore. They're not real, are they? When Alexander didn't respond, she spoke quietly, her voice oddly calm. Did my father pay you to be my friend? Alexander stared at the contracts. I'm so sorry. Stunned, Lena stood up abruptly and took a step back. You've been lying to me all this time? No! Yes. Alexander tried to compose himself. But I never wanted to sign them. It wasn't my idea. Then why did you agree? Your father insisted. I needed the money, at least at first, Alexander said, trying to justify his actions. I didn't know you. Everything was so new. I never liked signing them, and I told your father many times I wanted to stop. I never spent any of the money either. I don't believe this, she whispered. Do you even like me? Alexander tried to take her in his arms. Yes, Lena, I love you. But she was too far gone, shaking with anger. She didn't hear him. Is this all I ever was? A way for you to make extra money? She brushed the tears from her face. I promise, I never asked for anything. It was all your father. I didn't know who to believe anymore. She yelled, exasperated. She pointed at the objects lying on the bed. What about those? Alexander stared at the objects and then at Lena. He wanted to remember in exact detail the way she looked at him before she found out. Even when she was upset, she could see the hope in her eyes. He could hear tenderness in her voice, but the feeling of love radiating off of her. He wanted to remember all of those things because he knew that once she knew the truth, the whole truth, everything would change. He rubbed the charm of his mother's necklace in his pocket and swallowed. I can't do this anymore, he said, looking wearily at her. You deserve to know who I really am. He took a deep breath and sat down on his bed, dropping his head in his hands. Let me start at the beginning. My father wasn't an international art dealer. He was an art thief, one of the best. I spent my life moving from place to place with him and my mother, trying not to get caught. He was grooming me to follow in his footsteps. That's why I'm so good at manipulating objects and reading people. That's why I had so many stamps in my passport. That's why I never stayed in a real school long enough to make any friends. He paused, lifting his face stony. As I got older, I began to realize what my father was doing was wrong, but my mother had nothing, no job, no savings. We didn't know what else to do. And it's hard to leave that life once you're in it. It's such a rush, taking something, earning a monthly salary in the span of a few hours. Still, I knew it was wrong, and I told my mother that many times. At first, she was afraid to leave, but she finally relented. She didn't want me to end up like him, so she promised she'd do what she could to get us a safe place. Lena shook her head, her brain working hard to process everything. How did you end up here? Are your parents even dead? Alexander's shoulders slumped and he nodded. Yes, they are. That night my parents died and we were staying in an abandoned barn in Boldenham outside of Amsterdam. We just arrived after fleeing the Germans because it wasn't safe there anymore. As he spoke, Lena remembered the stamp in his passport that she'd found on the night that they met. My mother and father got into a fight because of me. I told her again that I wanted to go to a proper school and be a normal kid. She'd been hiding small amounts of cash every time we completed a job, hoping to be able to build up enough for us to go. But that night, my father found her stash and got so angry. They'd had fights before, but this one was bad. He stopped, shivering at the memory. I was worried that he was going to kill her. So I ran to the nearest house and begged the couple inside to get help. And then I ran back to the barn to try to save my mother. Alexander nearly choked on his next word. My father had already hit her a few times, but he was getting more aggressive, and he was holding a butcher knife. When he saw me, he came for me. I would have died for her, Lena, he said, his face twisting into a horrible shape. I tried to die for her. But she shoved me out of the way, and at the last second, just in time for him to strike. He closed his eyes, feeling sweat gathering on his hands. The blow was meant for me, but it killed her. He felt tears building and then brushed them away, forcing himself to keep going. I was furious. I couldn't handle that my father had taken away the person I loved most. Something came over me, and I grabbed that knife. I didn't mean for it to be so bad. I just wanted to hurt him for what he'd done to her. Alexander's eyes went glassy, like he wasn't going to look at Lena, but rather through her, like she was translucent. Then I heard the sirens wailing. There was blood all over my hands. I didn't know what to do. I grabbed my mother's necklace and I sprinted out the back. I just ran and ran with no destination in mind. The next morning, I cleaned myself up in one of the streams and I found my way and then kept running. About a day after, I saw the circus carriage and I thought I could find a place to hide until I figured out my next move. Alexander glanced at Lena, who was staring at him, horrified. I wasn't supposed to stay here. I was supposed to take what I needed to survive and move on, but then I collapsed, and you found me. So you used us? Lena asked quietly. There was an edge to her voice that made Alexander's heart hurt. No. Well, yes, at first, he replied uncomfortably. I didn't know if I could trust you, but I ended up loving it here. I loved spending time with you. I wanted to stay. I never felt like I belonged anywhere before. You stole that magnifying glass from the planetarium. Lena continued, slowly piecing together bits of Alexander's story. And you've stolen all of those, haven't you? She said, pointing to the objects on his bed. He nodded, his face full of remorse. But I've changed. There were more, but you inspired me to be a better person. His voice grew calmer. Lena, whatever you set your mind to, you somehow achieve it. You showed me what was possible. And when you believe in yourself... So I just started returning them. See? He pulled out a sheet of paper from the drawer. Lena took it, scanning the contents quickly. It was a detailed list of every object that he'd taken and where he'd taken it from. Most of them had been crossed out. I've been keeping record. The ones with no line through them, those are the ones I still have to return. He shook his head, pleading. I'm not the same boy that I was. You have to believe me. He looked up and saw the pain in her eyes. Lena, don't. Her voice was beginning to crack. We can start over together, now that you know. Start over? How can I ever believe anything you'd ever say to me again? Lena screamed, flung the door open. Alexander leapt up to follow her, but she whirled around. Stay away from me, she said, her voice cutting him like shards of ice. And then she turned around and raced away from Alexander, from her father, from everything that had just shattered her whole world. What? Oh my God. What? Awful. Awful. I mean, I feel for all of them, except for Horace and Chadwick. I don't like them. I mean, it's just like my brain is like, I mean, we all need to know how it all ends. Did you get a perfect pour today? I did get a perfect pour today. Thank you, Victoria. Yeah. Horace, I'm really sad, actually. I have to tell you guys, this is really sad. I'm sad about a lot of the things in it, but I'm especially sad to find out that Horace isn't just like a showman, that he's actually like a bad dude, because I was on his side in the beginning. Like, I was like, okay, you know, like, I'm with you, but like, this is not okay. Like, what he's doing here is literally life ruining, you know? You're not really surprised. I know, but like, I wanted him to be good. I wanted him to be good. I really did. I wanted him to be a good guy. Like, I wanted him to be just like a little money hungry, like whatever, you know, blah, blah. Like, I wanted that, but I didn't want this. Awful. Awful. Wow. Just wow. I mean, I'm just flabbergasted. I mean, like, that's my pessimist showing. I know. I just really, I love show people at my core, because I'm one of them. You know what I mean? Like, these, you know what we say, like, you're born with grease paint in your veins, you know, you just are who you are. And I just wanted him to just be one of us. No more chapters today. I gotta go because, the next chapter is actually fairly long, and I do have to get to work finishing stuff for the restock. I have a lot to do today, and Zoe and Catherine are coming over for breakfast, as they usually do. But I always want to believe the best in show people, just like at their core. But I can't, not in this situation. I do for Theo. So like, Theo is the type of showman that I'm talking about. Like, Theo is a show person as well, and even though he has been found to be a cheater, I don't think he's purposefully hurting anyone in that. Horace did this knowing that it would hurt people. I'm sad that Theo made that mistake, but I think he's doing everything possible in his power to make up for his mistake. And I do think at his core, he probably is a good person. I'll be live tonight probably around 5:15 or 5:30 Pacific time. Approximately 5:15, 5:30, Alex, approximately. I do think Theo is a good person in his soul. I know Alexander is a good person. I do not, despite everything that we just found out about Alexander, I don't think that makes him a bad person at all. I think that the situation dictated the outcome, not him, not his personhood. You know what I mean? There's no debate about Lena. We all know, you know, with Lena. But the rest of them are so complex. All of those four guys are all just like so complex as people. I guess Chadwick's not that complex. Although he kind of is on one level, because he's doing what he's being told. It's his job, you know? Would he have done it if it wasn't his job? Probably not. Probably not. Man, this is just like, it's so much. So much. Okay, well, I will see you all later. That was wild. I can't believe all of the things we just found out. Good morning, Jayla. I'll see you all this afternoon / evening / whatever for slime stuff. Wow. Just wow. So much.